All right, here we are again for another ICS Defense Force. Thanks for joining in, everybody. As usual, any comments you have and questions are up, please make sure you put those in the comments area. We'll get to those shortly. So I am Dean Parsons, certified SANS instructor for ICS 515 and the new ICS 418 as well. Pivoting through today, of course, with any ICS Defense Force episode, it will be applicable to any critical infrastructure sector. Now, in these episodes, we have been going over incident response for control system environments. We've started out with the prep phase. We've done detection identification. Last episode was evidence acquisition, which we'll use in today's episode, which is time critical analysis. So as we get through and welcome you guys in for this episode, again, reminder to put your questions in the comments section below. The whole objective here is to understand what time critical analysis is during incident response for control systems. What is the goal of time critical analysis? How do we execute it in a timely manner, of course, to provide options for the next phase, which is eradication. So let's jump into what time critical analysis is for control systems, so answering some of these questions as we go through. Now, specifically, the difference between IT incident response and control system incident response is that typically in ICS, we are walking through and continuing to fight through the attacks. So things like maintaining safety, reliability of operations, the control systems, maintaining their uptime, and so on and so forth, and control system integrity continues to operate while we're doing our analysis. So this is not the case in control systems where we see some kind of malware and we shut the plant down. Traditional containment and eradication steps may cause more damage to the ICS than the threats we actually uncover through the analysis. So again, we're fighting through the attacks during time critical analysis and as that's being progressed through. So as we pivot through a little bit more of what this is, how we're going to set this up, it's all about using and executing the fast and tested techniques and tools we pre-positioned. That means just like in the last episode, we talked about pre-positioning data acquisition tools, which can be in the form of a USB drive to position it to acquire memory in times of need like this. So it's about using those tools to gather the information to be able to provide it for timely analysis in this phase. The objective is quickly run through all of that data, starting with memory, which you'll see in a minute why it's so important, but also understand the potential nature of the threat. Should we take the plant down? Should we not take the plant down? Critical questions that can be answered through this process, which goes right into the next phase next week, which is on eradication. Also, the potential impact to operations. If we have malware at this stage that we've analyzed and it can safely be contained without a shutdown, then that's more appropriate to do. So let's get into a little bit more about what critical analysis tools we can leverage. And traditional tools, can they be applicable in the ICS or not? Well, there's a few that we can and there's some that we can't use. So let's pivot through what this means. So if you're thinking, can you get malware analysis tools inside of a control system environment, or at least to use in the ICS, then you're absolutely correct. However, hold the boat for a second. We're not going to be jumping into complete reverse engineering of malware code. We want samples specifically from the last phase and this phase in incident response for ICS, but going through the code step by step using decompilers is not the appropriate tools to be doing or processes in this case. However, automated malware analysis, sandboxes, for example, absolutely can be leveraged here. Now, there are sandboxes which are more tailored towards industrial control system in the last couple of years. They're more appropriate, but you can start off with an automated malware analysis sandbox as something as simple as a cuckoo sandbox that's widely and freely available. So automated malware analysis absolutely is in scope for us. In addition, because we acquire data from the last step, now we can scope the environment. This means indicators of compromise scoping, which can mean And of course, hopefully we are including our network stack as well. So any kind of PCAPs you can get from the environment, but if you can't, and if you only get the 5 tuple data or flow data, you can absolutely use that here as well. Beyond that, of course, is using tools to quickly, keyword being quickly, go through large memory files from critical infrastructure assets to look for malicious activity. Stay tuned. In a couple slides, we do have some shortcuts to get to that malware inside memory in a moment. In addition to the malware analysis through memory and picking through the memory, hey, how's it going? Welcome aboard. That's guys from all over. It's fantastic. Beyond memory analysis, we can also look at PLC logic code changes as well. So think not malware loaded on PLCs. Think how can an adversary manipulate the code that literally runs our plant floor? How do we analyze that during an actual incident while maintaining safety and reliability? Some quick steps on that coming up as well. So to do some of this, what about traditional tools you may have used in other DFIR activities and your skill sets from other courses or your practical application in your roles? So things like RedLine, things like Volatility, the tried, true, and tested infrastructure tool to look at memory and dissect memory, absolutely can be utilized. Similarly, REMnux for malware analysis as well. So absolutely, some of these traditional tools can be leveraged here and really excel in some of these environments where you have possibly smaller memory captures, because we could be dealing with legacy devices, not huge memory in devices on an enterprise network, as an example. But again, no surprise, we're going to prioritize memory from those critical Windows OT assets we talked about several times on this show, which is the data historian, the HMI, of course, and the engineering workstation, critical assets that we know are targeted. Getting memory from those is perfect. And going back to the last episode, positioning those USB extraction toolkits around those assets is really kind of where we want to be. So yes, we can leverage volatility the same way you would in IT. We're looking for possibly different things in the environment though, but let's walk through executing volatility on a memory capture from a human machine interface at any plant, again, applicable to any part of the critical infrastructure sectors. In this case here, you have to forgive me. Yes, I did use the word Stuxnet here. We are still in 2022, but still a lot to learn from Stuxnet in several ways. From Stuxnet here, we actually have a memory capture from an HMI where Stuxnet was actually executed. And of course, we're using volatility, so VOL here, -F, passing in the memory file into volatility. And now you'll notice we're using Volatility Framework version 3, which we're using windows.malfind. So today's whole conversation is talking about timely analysis. Windows.malfind, using the new framework and volatility, is going to sift through memory, and it's going to tell you what it thinks is malicious activity. Super awesome to streamline your critical analysis and timely analysis. Now, beyond just looking for malware, such as possible processes that may have been injected with DLL injection hooks, for example, you see on the screen here 2 executables, which volatility thinks it was injected in case it was. There's other modules in volatility as well to help in this quick triage when you have a memory capture from a typical or critical ICS asset, such as the net scan. So Windows.net scan allows you to look at what processes are actually using the network in any capture. Beyond that, of course, you can use C2 activity to line up a C2 IP address as an indicator of compromise to a process that can be exfiltrating data out or providing remote access. All of these little tidbits contribute to what options we'll have for the next phase, which is going to be safe containment and safe eradication in an environment. Now, there's other ones as well inside volatility, such as Windows.pstree, which of course looks at the processes in the environment, specifically possibly hidden processes in the environment. Again, quick ways to understand if you have malware in the environment. And of course, beyond that, one last thing before we leave this slide on volatility for ICS, we can use the windows.registry.print key, and that of course displays cached registry keys, which could be used for persistence on industrial control system Windows OT devices. And before we forget where we are in ICS, we do not typically reboot a lot of critical infrastructure systems, which means persistence can last across a reboot, or reboot is not even required to wipe that persistence out. Uptime is largely very, very high for ICS. So malware can exist and persist in the ICS for quite some time versus IT. Now, even beyond looking at the memory captures from an ICS device, we can now pivot to using volatility just as you would in IT to now extract out those malicious processes that Malfind has indicated might be malicious. In this case here on screen, we're using volatility again with the same memory file we know now is likely contaminated. And in this case, we're giving it a -O. That's the output directory structure. And also using the volatility windows.memmap. Memmap also with the -PID process ID. And that process ID, in this case, 668, with the -dump, allows you to extract out those files in a form that you can literally take and analyze in your sandboxes for quick analysis. Again, we're not doing code reversing here, right? No decompilers, no ollie debug required. But in this case here, we can now extract out malicious processes. Quickest thing you can do now is do hashing of that process, upload that hash only to possibly online services like VirusTotal to very quickly, within minutes, understand if one, the adversary or anybody has ever seen this type of malware before, this file based on its hash, and two, understand how it will actually work. So the behaviors of that malware is usually listed on similar sites like that as well. But beyond uploading the hash, which is static properties analysis, to really streamline your analysis, you can do that malware analysis in a sandbox as well. So just some examples of how to utilize traditional tools for analysis in ICS. Now we're going to come to the phase where there's non-traditional tools that we're going to use what's in the environment already, and there's areas where we wish there were streamlined tools. So in the ICS, beyond memory captures, beyond network captures from the control environment and Windows OT assets, we do not have a streamlined tool for PLC memory analysis. So today, there's no plugin for volatility to look through the many different versions of vendor software out there for PLCs and firmware and what's loaded in memory. Unfortunately, we have to do it another way. So earlier we talked about things like understanding what production project files you have running the plant floor or project files in production, hashing that file, knowing exactly what's up in the environment, and then occasionally when you're in this state of time-critical analysis, hashing that file with a backup you may have had. And if you have a different hash, then you realize you're dealing with some kind of change in the PLC. Now, here's the interesting aspect. When you do have a change, the hash will only tell you that something did change. It will not go through and tell you what changed in the actual ladder logic. So if you're in a cookie factory and inside that ladder logic file it said, put in more chocolate chip cookies, then you're not going to see that. You have to go in through the code, which means you have to have ladder logic or engineering knowledge, that file going through what changed in the past. Beyond that, again, looking at non-traditional analysis, specifically for the ICS, is the trending information and data from the data historian. Now, earlier episodes, we kind of talked about that data historian having information about the process. You'll usually see a trend, a normal trend in the process until something changes or happens. If you see a spike or valley in that data, it's a great indication something changed. So thinking about time-critical analysis, going back to what was the most recent change in the historian, what time frame was that, and that's another indication of where you can start using that time frame for your quick analysis. So beyond all of these things, from memory capture, from the network as well, we are looking at some specific industrial control system functionality to understand what threats are in the environment, to make the decisions of what are we going to do now. We know the threats are there. What kind of threats are they? Are they IT commodity-based malware? Is it ICS specific, Stuxnet version 2, Trisis 2, for example, or something malicious that we haven't seen just yet? So as we come down to the last part of this episode, I'm going to pivot into 4 main questions as a takeaway for your ICS environment and hopefully address any questions you guys have thus far. So these are the main questions, takeaways for time-critical analysis for ICS as part of incident response. Can't say it enough. Going back to the last episode, do we have those pre-positioned data acquisition tools around our critical infrastructure assets that we know are important, relied on, but also targeted? What about how far along is the adversary in the attack as you pivot through your analysis? You see, you're going to be getting malware. You're going to be analyzing that malware. You're going to be looking at the network, finding C2 activity that may or may not be established. This is going to help you to understand literally where in your network the adversary is and how far along in the attack are they. Is there additional skills required? As you're doing some of this timely analysis, you may come across situations where you may need additional external help as well. So it's appropriate to call in folks from an incident response team, such as having an already pre-positioned incident response retainer to help out. In addition to that, while we're talking about external sources, depending on your sector, you may be required to report incidents, gathering your data up and reporting out what you're finding as well. So if you're, for example, in the United States or in North America and you're in the electric sector, you may have to report your incidents out to NERC and NERC-CIP. Beyond that, of course, there may be a legal aspect or entity you have to report out. And beyond that, there's other authorities that may need to be contacted as well based on your critical infrastructure sector. And of course, last but not least is there enough evidence and analysis completed for the next phase, which is containment, which shifts then into eradication. So that's all we have for this episode. I'm going to take a look to see if there's any questions at this point or any comments and address some of those. All right. Wow. Good stuff. Okay. So we have some comments here. Thanks for joining, everybody. So I didn't realize tools like Volatility, REMnux worked in ICS environments as well. Absolutely. So thanks for tuning in. And the thing is, it does help for sure, but it's not going to be applicable to everything. It's only going to be applicable to maybe the first 10 or 20% of that Purdue model, right? So I love the way you're thinking, but the PLCs, the RTUs, some of the engineering devices, even embedded HMIs, Volatility may not be helpful with. So great question on that. Great stuff. Yeah, so you're from France. Super cool. All right. I think some folks from the Netherlands as well. Good stuff. Okay. Well, let me see if there's any other questions here. Wow. Georgia, Idaho. Awesome. Calgary, another Canadian. Super cool. Welcome aboard. And someone from Texas. Excellent. So what I'll do is I'll pivot to shutting down this live stream for today, but I will be on as well after the fact to address any questions that may come in the stream. So thank you so much for connecting with us again today. The next episode, we're going to talk about containment, using everything from today's episode to understand how we can safely contain a threat. And the big question there is going to be who makes the call of containment, shutting the plant down or not. So we'll get into that next time. Until then, we'll talk to you later. Have a great day.